"You are no one," said my brother. My parents nodded in agreement. I packed my things and Ad worked hard to build a life for himself as a skilled diesel mechanic, a career he took pride in. He spent long hours at the shop, hands blackened with grease, working on massive engines that powered the world. While his friends from high school were still trying to figure out what they wanted to do with their lives, Daniel had already secured a well-paying job. He was independent, responsible, and had a solid income. But in his parents' eyes, he had taken the wrong path. Susan and Robert, his parents, had always imagined a different future for him, one that involved a college degree, an office job, and a lifestyle they could boast about to their friends. It didn't matter to them that Daniel was making more money than many of his peers with degrees. To them, a mechanic was someone who got dirty for a living, someone who didn't belong in the same social circles as lawyers, doctors, or engineers. Their disappointment in him was never outright stated, but it was always there, lingering in the way they spoke to him, the sighs they let out when he came home in his work clothes, the way they subtly avoided talking about his job when speaking to relatives. His younger brother Tyler, on the other hand, was treated completely differently. At 20 years old, Tyler was everything Daniel wasn't: lazy, entitled, and completely uninterested in responsibility. He was enrolled in community college but barely attended his classes. Instead, he spent his days in front of his computer, gaming for hours on end, eating junk food, and living in a bubble where he had no real worries. While Daniel was waking up at dawn to go to work, Tyler was still asleep, having stayed up all night playing games with his online friends. The favoritism had always been there, but Daniel hadn't realized just how deep it ran until he was forced to start paying rent. His parents had made it clear that if he was going to continue living under their roof, he needed to contribute financially. They set the rent at $800 per month, a hefty sum, but Daniel had agreed, figuring that it was fair to pay his share. What he didn't realize was that his $800 was covering the entire mortgage. His parents weren't paying anything out of their own pocket. The house they lived in, the roof over all of their heads, was being paid for entirely by him. And Tyler? He paid nothing. He continued to live rent-free, enjoying the comforts of home without any obligations. Not only that, but their parents also treated him to meals, gave him spending money, and never pressured him to find a job. Whenever Daniel questioned this arrangement, he was met with deflections. "Tyler is still in school," his mother would say. "He needs time to figure things out." It didn't seem to matter that Daniel had been working full-time since he was 18, that he had never received the same kind of leniency. The more Daniel thought about it, the more it burned. Every morning, he left for work, knowing that he was essentially paying for everyone else's comfort. He would return home exhausted, only to see Tyler lounging on the couch, eating snacks their parents had bought for him, without a single worry. Their mother would fawn over him, asking if he needed anything, if he wanted her to make him something to eat, while Daniel was barely acknowledged. One evening, the resentment boiled over. Daniel had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift. His hands ached, his back was sore, and all he wanted was a hot shower and some peace and quiet. But when he walked into the house, the first thing he saw was Tyler, sprawled out on the couch, controller in hand, headset on, yelling at his game. Empty soda cans and chip bags littered the coffee table. Their mother stood in the kitchen, making Tyler his favorite meal, steak and mashed potatoes, while Daniel's stomach grumbled from hunger. "Long day?" his father asked, barely glancing up from the newspaper. Daniel clenched his jaw. "Yeah," he muttered, walking toward the fridge. "Could you keep it down, man?" Tyler complained, not even looking away from his screen. "I'm in the middle of a match." Daniel froze. He turned to his brother, then to his parents, who didn't seem to think anything of what had just been said. It was as if he were invisible. "That's funny," Daniel said, his voice tight. "I just worked a 12-hour shift to pay for this house while you sat here playing video games all day. But yeah, sure, I'll keep it down." His mother shot him a warning look. "Daniel, don't start. Don't start." He let out a bitter laugh. "Let me get this straight. I pay $800 a month to live here, while Tyler pays nothing, and I'm the one who's not allowed to start anything?" "Tyler is still in school," his father said, as if that explained everything. "He doesn't even go to class," Daniel shot back. "He sits here all day playing games while I'm out working my ass off." "That's enough," his mother snapped. "We've had this conversation before. You're older, you have a job. You can afford to contribute." Daniel clenched his fist. "So I'm paying for all of you to live here?" His father set the newspaper down, his expression unreadable. "You're paying your fair share." "No," Daniel said. "I'm paying for everything while Tyler gets a free ride." Silence. Tyler kept playing his game, unfazed, while their parents looked at him like he was the problem. His mother shook her head. "You always have to make everything difficult." Daniel scoffed. "Right. Because expecting fairness is making things difficult." "Got it." His father sighed. "If you don't like it, you can always move out." Daniel felt his stomach drop. He had expected denial, maybe some weak justification, but this was a clear message. They didn't care. They were fine with taking his money as long as he kept quiet about it, but the moment he protested, he was disposable. He looked at Tyler, still gaming, completely indifferent. He looked at his parents, who had already dismissed the conversation, acting as if he was the unreasonable one. Daniel turned and walked to his room, the weight of reality settling on his shoulders. He had spent years trying to be the responsible son, the hard-working one, the one who carried the burden without complaint. But in the end, it didn't matter. They had made their priorities clear. And he was never one of them. Daniel had thought things couldn't get any worse. He had resigned himself to the fact that he was essentially paying the mortgage on a house where he was treated like an outsider. He had learned to bite his tongue when his parents doted on Tyler while treating him like an afterthought. He had even forced himself to ignore the sheer injustice of watching his younger brother waste his days gaming, while he worked himself to exhaustion just to keep a roof over all their heads. But he had been wrong. Things could always get worse. It started subtly, almost like a joke. One evening, after a brutal 14-hour shift at the shop, Daniel came home and went straight to the laundry room, throwing his grease-stained work clothes into the washing machine. Before he could even start the cycle, his mother appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You need to start paying extra if you're going to use the washing machine so much," she said. Daniel frowned, thinking he had misheard. "What?" "The water bill is high and you do laundry way more than the rest of us," she explained. "From now on, it's $5 per load." Daniel let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're joking, right?" His mother's expression didn't change. "I'm serious. Water isn't free." Daniel stared at her, waiting for the punchline that never came. He glanced past her, where Tyler sat in the living room, surrounded by takeout containers and gaming gear, fully immersed in whatever game he was streaming. He had never seen Tyler do his own laundry, not once. Their mother still did it for him. Daniel clenched his jaw, forcing himself to breathe through the anger rising in his chest. He wasn't going to argue. Not today. He grabbed his laundry basket, turned around, and drove to a laundromat instead. But that was only the beginning. A few days later, he pulled into the driveway after another exhausting shift, barely able to keep his eyes open. Just as he was stepping out of his truck, his father emerged from the garage, holding a notepad. "You can't park here anymore," his father said flatly. Daniel blinked. "What?" "You take up too much space, and it's unfair to the rest of us. If you want to park in the driveway, it's $50 a month." Daniel's stomach twisted. He looked past his father toward the driveway. Tyler's car, a brand new model their parents had bought for him, was parked neatly in the best spot. The garage door was slightly open, revealing even more of Tyler's luxury. A private gaming room set up with high-end monitors, LED lights, and an expensive chair that likely cost more than Daniel's rent. Daniel had worked for everything he had, yet here he was, being charged for existing in a house he was paying for. Meanwhile, Tyler sat on his throne of handouts, free from any responsibility. That was when Daniel realized something horrifying. His parents weren't just playing favorite, they were exploiting him. Things escalated from there. His mother started labeling food in the fridge with Tyler's name, warning Daniel not to touch it. If he wanted to eat at home, he had to buy his own groceries and keep them in a separate cabinet. One time, he absent-mindedly grabbed a slice of pizza from a box in the fridge, only for his mother to snatch it from his hands. "That's for Tyler," she snapped. "He didn't even buy it," Daniel said, dumbfounded. "I got it for him," she replied. "But I pay rent." His mother gave him a cold, dismissive look. "If you want better treatment, pay more rent." Daniel wanted to scream. The real breaking point came one Friday night. He had just gotten back from a side job, working late on a customer's diesel truck for extra cash. He was exhausted, ready to shower and go straight to bed. But as soon as he stepped into the garage, he felt his stomach drop. Tyler and his friends were there, loud, drunk, and laughing. But that wasn't what made Daniel freeze. It was the sight of them holding his expensive mechanic tools, waving them around like toys. One of Tyler's friends had Daniel's $600 torque wrench in his hand, swinging it like a baseball bat, while another was balancing a set of socket wrenches on his head. A third was pressing buttons on Daniel's diagnostic scanner, giggling like a child. Thousands of dollars worth of precision tools, tools Daniel had spent years collecting, tools that were vital to his job, were being tossed around like party prop. Daniel's blood turned to fire. "What the hell are you doing?" he bellowed, storming into the garage. The laughter stopped. Tyler turned, holding Daniel's impact wrench in one hand and a beer in the other. His face twisted into an annoyed smirk. "Relax, dude. We're just having fun." "Fun?" Daniel's voice shook. "Do you even know how much this stuff costs? You just ruined that wrench." One of Tyler's friends scoffed. "Chill out, man. It's just tools. Just tools. Just the tools that put food on Daniel's table. Just the tools that kept him afloat while his own family bled him dry." Daniel yanked the impact wrench out of Tyler's hand, fury making his vision blur. "Get out." Tyler rolled his eyes. "Seriously? You're kicking us out over some stupid tools? Out. Now." Tyler's friends grumbled but shuffled out, laughing under their breath. Tyler lingered, his expression smug. "God, you're such a buzzkill," he muttered, setting down his beer on Daniel's workbench like he owned the place. Daniel was shaking with rage. "You don't respect anything. You don't work, you don't pay rent, and you think you can just take whatever you want." Tyler smirked. "It's not like you're paying enough to call the shots." And that was when their parents walked in. "Daniel, what is going on?" their father asked, voice clipped with irritation. "Tyler and his idiot friends trashed my tools," Daniel said, pointing to the scattered mess in the garage. "They're drunk and they don't even care." Their mother sighed dramatically. "Oh, Daniel, don't be so dramatic. It's just some tools. Just some tools." Daniel's voice cracked. "These are my livelihood. Do you know how much money I just lost because of this?" Tyler scoffed. "Oh, please. You act like you're the only one who works hard." "You don't work at all," Daniel snapped. And then his mother said it, the sentence that finally broke him. "If you want better treatment, pay more rent." Daniel felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath him. He stared at his parents, waiting for them to realize what they had just said. But they didn't. His mother looked at him like he was an inconvenience. His father sighed like he was tired of the conversation. And Tyler just grinned victorious. That was it. Daniel didn't say another word. He turned on his heel, walked to his room, and started packing. He wasn't going to stay in this house a second longer. His parents had made their choice. And now Daniel was making his. Daniel lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. The anger burned inside him, but beneath it was something colder, something final. He was done. Truly, completely done. His entire adult life, he had been paying for a house that wasn't his, for a family that didn't care about him. He had sacrificed his time, his energy, his money, $800 every month for 4 years. He did the math in his head, then grabbed his phone and started writing it down. $800 a month for 48 months. $38,400. Then there were the extra charges. The utilities he had been forced to pay on top of rent. The fees for using the washing machine, parking, eating food from the fridge. Every little expense they had nickel and dimed him for. He dug through old bank statements, adding it all up. The final number made his stomach turn. $60,000. $60,000. That was what he had given them. And where had it gone? Not into savings. Not into helping him. It had gone straight into the mortgage that he alone had been paying. And Tyler? Tyler, who slept in the master bedroom. Tyler, who had a private gaming room. Tyler, who had a brand new car their parents had bought for him. Tyler, who had destroyed Daniel's tools and walked away laughing. That was when Daniel decided. He was leaving. But not yet. Not until it would hurt the most. The plan. The next morning, Daniel called an apartment complex on the other side of town. He set up a meeting, drove over, and signed a lease on the spot. The rent was higher than what he had been paying at home, but it didn't matter. At least here, he wouldn't be treated like a walking ATM. Then he went to the bank. He withdrew every last cent from his savings and opened a brand new account at a different bank, making sure his parents had no access. They had never directly taken money from him, but they had guilt him into handing it over too many times. That wouldn't happen again. With those two things done, he started moving his things out, quietly, carefully, piece by piece. He took his expensive tools first, locking them in his truck and driving them straight to his new place. Then his clothes, his personal belongings, everything he had bought with his own money. He worked late hours, so he used that as an excuse. If his parents asked why he was leaving the house with bags, he just said he was bringing things to the shop. It took 3 weeks to clear out everything important. And all the while, his family had no idea. His parents still treated him like a tenant who had no right to complain. They still gave Tyler everything he wanted. Tyler still sneered at him, bragging about his upcoming streaming career, while doing nothing all day. Daniel bit his tongue and waited. The escape. The end of the month came fast. His parents were too busy planning Tyler's latest big break to notice anything was different. On the last night, Daniel came home late, just as he always did. He walked past his father, who barely looked up from his newspaper. His mother was making Tyler a snack in the kitchen, not even acknowledging him. Perfect. Daniel went to his now nearly empty room, grabbed his last bag, and walked out the door for the final time. No goodbyes. No explanations. Just silence. The fallout. The next morning, the house was in chaos. Daniel's phone exploded with missed calls and texts. First from his mother, then from his father, then from Tyler. They didn't ask where he was. They demanded to know why the mortgage payment hadn't gone through. Because, of course, it was due that day. And for the first time in 4 years, Daniel wasn't paying it. He ignored the calls at first, letting them stew. Then, finally, he answered. His mother's voice was shrill, almost panicked. Daniel, what is going on? The bank just called. The mortgage didn't go through. That's not my problem, Daniel said coldly. What are you talking about? You always. Not anymore, he interrupted. I'm done. Silence. Then his father's voice cut in, deep with barely restrained anger. Daniel, you can't just walk out on your responsibility. Daniel almost laughed. My responsibility? You mean your house? The one I've been paying for? Yeah, I can walk out on it. And I did. His mother started pleading. Daniel, we don't have the money. If we miss this payment. That sounds like a you problem. You're our son, she snapped, voice breaking. No, Daniel said, finally letting the bitterness seep in. I was your tenant. And I'm not paying rent anymore. Tyler finally spoke, his voice dripping with entitlement. Dude, you're seriously screwing us over. Daniel's grip on his phone tightened. You mean like how you screwed up my tools? Like how you wasted my money while doing nothing? Yeah. Guess what? You'll have to figure things out without me. You can't do this, his mother said, her voice shaking. You can't just leave us like this. Daniel's next words were calm, final. I just did. And with that, he hung up. Aftermath. They tried everything to get him back. His parents sent guilt-tripping messages, claiming he was abandoning his family. They tried to call his workplace, demanding he come home. His mother even showed up at his apartment once, banging on the door, sobbing about how he was breaking the family apart. Daniel didn't open the door. And Tyler? Tyler was the worst. His messages ranged from furious threats, you better come back and fix this, you selfish hole, to pathetic begging, dude, I don't know how to get a job, you need to help me. Daniel didn't respond. A month later, the house went into foreclosure. His parents had no savings. They had never planned for this. They had relied on him, assuming he would just keep paying forever. Now they were losing everything. Moving on. Daniel's life got better. For the first time in years, he had peace. No extra fees, no guilt-tripping, no being treated like a second-class citizen in his own home. His apartment wasn't huge, but it was his. And the best part? With the money he was no longer wasting on that house, he was finally able to start his own shop. It took months of hard work, but he made it happen. And as for his family? The last he heard, his parents had to move into a tiny rental after the bank took the house. Tyler had to get a job. His streaming career never took off. He ended up working at a fast food place, complaining every day about how unfair life was. Daniel never reached out. They had made their choice. And now, finally, so had he. The next morning, Daniel woke up in his new apartment with a rare feeling of peace. There were no yelling voices, no guilt-tripping, no passive-aggressive remarks about how much space he was taking up in a house he had been paying for. For the first time in years, he was free. Meanwhile, across town, chaos erupted in his old house. His parents had expected the mortgage to be paid like always, automatically deducted from Daniel's account. But this time, there was nothing. The bank had called early that morning, informing them that the payment had been declined due to insufficient funds. At first, Susan, his mother, thought it was a mistake. She called the bank in a panic, demanding answers. There must be some error. My son always pays on time. The voice on the other end was professional but unmoved. Ma'am, the account that was making the payments is no longer active. Susan's heart dropped. What do you mean no longer active? She snapped. The account was closed last week. She didn't even hear the rest of what the bank representative said. All she could think about was Daniel. He had really left. And he had taken his money with him. She slammed the phone down and turned to Robert, her husband, who was sitting at the kitchen table, rubbing his temples. He left, she whispered. He really left. Robert didn't respond. He had already realized what this meant. They were broke. Tyler, still half asleep, shuffled into the kitchen, yawning. "Mom, can you make breakfast?" Susan snapped. "Do you not understand what's happening? Your brother just screwed us over. We can't pay the mortgage." Tyler blinked. He wasn't fully awake yet, and his mother's sudden hysteria didn't make sense. "So? Just call him. Tell him to send the money." Robert glared at his youngest son. "Do you think we haven't tried?" He pointed at Susan's phone, which had at least 20 missed calls and unread texts. Tyler scowled. "Well, that's just great." He turned toward the living room, where his custom gaming setup was waiting. "Whatever. I'll figure something out after my stream." He plopped into his gaming chair, powered up his PC, and logged into his streaming account. He put on his headset and prepared to start. And then, everything shut off. The internet was down. Tyler froze. He clicked around, tried to restart the router, refreshed his computer. Nothing. The Wi-Fi was completely dead. "What the hell?" he muttered. "Mom. Dad. The internet's not working." Robert's face turned red. "Of course it's not working, you idiot. The bill wasn't paid." Tyler's stomach twisted. "What do you mean the bill wasn't paid?" Susan threw her hands in the air. "The internet was part of the automatic payments. And guess who was paying for all of it? Daniel." Tyler's entire body went stiff. His gaming career, his entire life, depended on the internet. And now, because of Daniel, it was gone. Panic set in. "No, no, no," he mumbled, trying to refresh the page again. "It has to come back on." "It's not coming back on," Robert growled. "Unless you plan on paying for it." Tyler scoffed. "Well, how am I supposed to do that if I can't stream?" Susan buried her face in her hands. "You're going to have to get a job, Tyler." Tyler laughed. "No, I'm not." Robert's voice was dangerously low. "Yes, you are." For the first time, Tyler actually looked at his parents. He saw the tension in their shoulders, the fear in his mother's eyes. It hit him like a brick. They were serious. And then, as if to make things worse, his phone buzzed with an alert. Credit card declined. Tyler's heart stopped. He tried again. Declined. His parents had been living off credit for months, relying on Daniel's money to pay everything off at the end of each cycle. But now, without Daniel's income, there was nothing to cover their growing debt. Susan tried to use her own card, declined. Robert tried his, declined. The realization came crashing down. They were broke. They had no savings, no backup plan. And Daniel? Daniel had walked away clean, leaving them to deal with the mess they had created. Tyler, shaking with disbelief, turned to his parents. "So what the hell am I supposed to do?" Susan sighed. "You're going to get a job, Tyler. A real one." Tyler scoffed. "I've never worked a day in my life. Who's gonna hire me?" His father picked up his phone, searched for job listings, and shoved it in Tyler's face. "Walmart is hiring." Tyler recoiled like he had been physically struck. "Walmart? You want me to work at Walmart?" Robert's eyes were dead. "Do you want to eat?" Tyler clenched his fist. "This is Daniel's fault. If he hadn't—" "No, this is your fault," Robert interrupted. His voice, for the first time, was filled with pure anger. "You sat in this house, doing nothing, while your brother worked his ass off. And now you're paying for it." Susan, too, looked exhausted. "We have no choice, Tyler. Either you work or we lose the house." For the first time in his life, Tyler was being forced to face reality. And he hated every second of it. The job. A week later, Tyler found himself standing in the middle of a Walmart break room, wearing the most humiliating thing he had ever put on, a blue vest with the company logo on it. It reeked of cheap detergent, and the name tag that read Tyler felt like a branding iron on his chest. He had applied, not because he wanted to, but because his father dragged him there personally. Now, instead of sleeping until noon, he had to wake up at 6 in the morning. Instead of gaming for 10 hours a day, he had to stand on his feet, stocking shelves and dealing with customers. The worst part? His coworkers barely tolerated him. He had walked into the job with the same arrogance he carried at home, acting like he was too good to be there. His supervisor, a middle-aged woman named Carol, shut that down immediately. "You're not special, kid," she said bluntly. "Now go mop up the spill in aisle 5. Tyler had never held a mop in his life. He had never cleaned anything. And now he was being ordered around like a nobody. The customers weren't any better. Some were rude, some ignored him entirely. No one cared about him. No one treated him like he was important. He wasn't an influencer here. He wasn't the golden child. He was just another worker in a name tag and a vest. And that's when it hit him. This was what Daniel had felt like all those years. All the exhaustion, all the disrespect, all the endless hours spent working for people who didn't care. Tyler was finally getting a taste of reality. And he hated it. Susan had never known real struggle. She had always lived comfortably, indulging in luxuries without a second thought. Daniel's money had kept her lifestyle intact for years. Her gym memberships, her weekly spa treatments, her shopping sprees. She never saw a problem with it because, in her mind, Daniel owed them. He was the responsible one, the provider, the son who was supposed to take care of the family. But now, with Daniel gone, the reality she had ignored for so long crashed down like a collapsing house of cards. The foreclosure notice had been the final blow. They had begged the bank for an extension, but with no income, no savings, and a mountain of unpaid bills, there was nothing they could do. The house Daniel had essentially paid for, was being taken away from them. And Susan? She had to give up everything. Her expensive gym membership was the first to go. She had tried to argue with Robert about it, saying that fitness was important, that she needed her personal trainer to keep in shape. But Robert had snapped at her, something he had never done before. "We can't even afford groceries, Susan. Who gives a damn about your gym membership?" Then went the spa treatments, the manicures, the facials, the massages. She had called the spa, expecting sympathy, only to be met with cold indifference. "If you can't pay, you can't book," the receptionist had said bluntly. And then, worst of all, she had to give up her credit cards. Susan had always prided herself on looking put together, on wearing designer clothes and carrying expensive bags. Now, for the first time, she had to shop at discount stores. She nearly broke down the first time she walked into a Walmart, not as a shopper indulging in impulse buys, but as someone who had no choice. She felt humiliated, but not as humiliated as Robert. Robert's fall from grace. Robert had always seen himself as the man of the house, a provider, a respectable figure. He had never actually been the one providing, Daniel had. But Robert had still enjoyed the illusion of control. Now, with the house slipping away and their credit destroyed, Robert was forced to do something that crushed what little pride he had left. He had to sell his golf clubs. Those clubs had been his last link to the life he used to have. Every Saturday, he had gone to the golf course with his old friends, bragging about his son's stable income while pretending it was his own. Now, he had to let them go just to scrape together enough money for rent. The worst part? His friends, his rich friends, mocked him for it. "You're selling your clubs, Rob? What happened? Tough times. Didn't you say your kid had a good job? Where'd all that money go?" Robert had no answer. And the humiliation didn't end there. With no savings and no job prospects, he had to take whatever work he could find. And the only place that was hiring? A pizza delivery service. A man who had once bragged about being the head of the household was now driving around in a beat-up car, handing greasy boxes to strangers for minimum wage plus tip. He hated every second of it. He hated the customers who barely looked at him. He hated the teenagers who sneered at him when he showed up late. He hated the college kids who tipped him in coins. But most of all, he hated himself. Because deep down, he knew this was his fault. Tyler's new reality. If Susan and Robert had lost everything, Tyler had lost even more. The foreclosure had forced them into a tiny two-bedroom apartment. It was nothing like the home they had taken for granted. The walls were thin, the kitchen was small, and worst of all, Tyler had to share a room with his father. There was no gaming room, no luxury, no privacy, just a cramped space with a single dresser and two twin beds. He had fought against it, of course. He had screamed and argued, demanding that his parents figure something out. But they had nothing left. So now, instead of spending his days gaming in a fully furnished private room, he had to wake up at 6 in the morning to go to Walmart. Tyler at work. Tyler had never worked a real job before. He had always thought he was too good for it, that people like him didn't need to do manual labor. That illusion shattered fast. The first thing he learned? Work was exhausting. After just one shift, his feet ached, his back hurt, and he was more tired than he had ever been in his life. And the worst part? No one cared. His managers didn't care that he was struggling. His coworkers didn't care that he was miserable. Customers barely looked at him. For the first time, he was invisible. And he hated it. The first time he tried to argue with his supervisor, demanding an easier position, she laughed in his face. "You're lucky you even have this job, kid." He had never been spoken to like that before. At home, he had been the golden child. He had been pampered, spoiled, untouchable. Now, he was just another minimum wage worker. And there was no escape. The internet was gone. His expensive PC was sold to help with bills. His friends, his online fans, had disappeared the moment he stopped streaming. No one cared about Tyler anymore. And for the first time in his life, He felt what it was like to be Daniel. Meanwhile, Daniel thrived. While his family drowned in their own failure, Daniel was rising higher than ever. His hard work was paying off. His boss had noticed his skills, his dedication, his ability to handle tough jobs without complaint. And because of that, Daniel was promoted. Not only did he get a raise, but he was given more control over operations, overseeing new hires and managing projects. He had respect. He had his own place. And for the first time, he had peace. No one was taking advantage of him. No one was demanding his money. No one was making him feel like a second-class citizen in his own home. He was free. One day, as he left work, he got a text from an unknown number. "Daniel, please. We need help." It was from Susan. Daniel read the message, stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. They had made their choice. Now they had to live with it. The apartment was suffocating. Susan sat on the tiny couch in their cramped living room, staring at the stack of unpaid bills piling up on the wobbly coffee table. Robert sat across from her, his head in his hands, his once pristine golf tan now faded into a dull, tired pallor. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the faint sound of Tyler's miserable groans echoed from the shared bedroom, where he was rage typing on his phone after another exhausting shift at Walmart. The humiliation was unbearable. Susan had lost everything: the house, her luxuries, her carefully maintained image of wealth. Robert, once the man of the house, was now delivering pizzas to ungrateful teenagers. Tyler, who had never lifted a finger in his life, was now being yelled at by customers over expired coupons. And the worst part? Daniel was thriving. They had seen glimpses of his new life through social media. A sleek new apartment, expensive tools for his shop, a fresh haircut, a relaxed smile, and, worst of all, plans for a vacation. That was when Susan broke down completely. "We have to fix this," she whispered. "We have to get Daniel back." Robert lifted his head slowly, exhausted. "And how do you suggest we do that? He won't answer our calls." Susan hesitated, then straightened her back. Desperation erased any remaining dignity. "We tell him we want to pool our resources," she said. "We're still family. We tell him we should all live together, that we'll help him with expenses. That way, he has no reason to say no." Robert was silent for a long moment, then sighed. "It's worth a shot." Tyler, overhearing the conversation, perked up for the first time in weeks. "You mean, if we move in with him, I get my own room again?" he asked. Susan forced a smile. "Yes, sweetheart. And you'll have faster internet." Tyler jumped at the idea immediately. He was tired of Walmart, tired of the apartment, tired of hearing Robert snore at night in the same tiny bedroom. If they moved in with Daniel, he could go back to how things were. They had their plan. Now they just needed Daniel to agree. The begging. That night, Susan texted Daniel, her tone carefully crafted to be as manipulative as possible. "Daniel, honey, we've been thinking. We should pool our resources as a family. It doesn't make sense for us to struggle when you have space in your apartment. We could help with expenses, and you wouldn't have to be alone. After all, we're still family. Family helps each other. Let's put the past behind us and move forward together. Love you." She waited eagerly for his response, convinced that her motherly guilt would work like it always had. But minutes passed. Then an hour. Then 2. No response. Tyler, impatient, grabbed his phone and sent his own message. "Dude, come on. Just let us move in. This whole thing has gone on long enough. It's not like you can't afford it. Just be cool for once." Silence. Finally, in the dead of night, Daniel responded. The message wasn't long. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't an apology or an explanation. It was a single screenshot. A bank statement. It showed every single mortgage payment Daniel had made over the past 4 years. $60,000. And below it, Daniel's only words. "Lose my number." The fallout. The room was dead silent as Susan, Robert, and Tyler stared at the screen. Their manipulation had failed. They had no leverage. No excuses. No way out. "He's really leaving us behind," Susan whispered, voice shaking. Tyler was furious. "What an ungrateful piece of—" "Shut up." Robert's voice was sharp, cold, final. For the first time in his life, Tyler actually shut his mouth. Because the truth was inescapable now. Daniel wasn't coming back. He had walked away, taken his money, and left them to rot in the consequences of their own actions. Tyler's breaking point. The next day at Walmart, Tyler's rage boiled over. He was stocking shelves when an old lady tapped him on the shoulder. "Excuse me, young man. Can you help me find the cat food?" Tyler, still stewing over Daniel's rejection, snapped. "It's literally right in front of you, lady." "What, you can't read?" gasped. The woman's face crumbled into shock, and within minutes, Tyler was dragged into the back office. His supervisor, Carol, was done with him. "You're fired," she said, shoving a termination slip at him. Tyler's jaw dropped. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm serious," Carol said, folding her arms. "You've been lazy, rude, and you act like this job is beneath you. You're not special, Tyler. You never were." Tyler felt his world collapse. No job. No income. No way to fix this. As he left the store, humiliated and completely defeated, one thought looped over and over in his head. This is all Daniel's fault. Daniel's victory. Meanwhile, Daniel was booking a vacation. With all the money he was no longer wasting on his parents, he could finally enjoy his life. A trip to Hawaii. First-class flights. Expensive hotels. All paid for with the savings they had never let him keep. Sitting on his new couch, he scrolled through his messages one last time. His mother's desperate pleading. His father's pathetic silence. Tyler's childish entitlement. He shook his head. They would never change. They would always expect him to fix their problems. And for once in his life, he wasn't going to. Daniel put his phone down, stretched, and let out a slow, satisfied sigh. For the first time ever, he was truly free.